Oh, we're doing, baby. We're doing. Yes, welcome to Jedi Options. The topic for today is beta weighting your portfolio delta or beta weighted delta. Listen, the topic du jour, I feel like the last couple of days has been how do you play defense? How do you reduce risk if the market breaks support, which we did? We broke support this week. And if there's one thing that I appreciate as an active trader, as an educated trader, it is that I am in complete control over how much exposure I have. I can dial it up, I can dial it down, but only because I know how to measure it. You have to know how to measure your exposure and then know what actions to take to increase it and decrease it. So on a fundamental level, to be a successful trader, you have to know those things. How do you measure your exposure? How do you dial it up? How do you dial it down? And maybe when you would do that, right? And so I actually have just a simple framework in my head where I say, well, when would I dial it up and down? Let's start with that. When the market breaks support, I want to dial my exposure down. When the market breaks resistance, I want to dial my exposure up because I have put faith in those signals. I think more times than not, you're gonna be happy, or you're going to benefit from dialing down your exposure in whatever capacity when the market breaks support. And so the Tales of a Technician blog yesterday, the coaches show last night, the Tackle Today message this morning, all shared the common theme of how do you play defense if the market breaks support? Now, how do you measure your exposure? Well, in the options market, as well, quite frankly, as in the stock market, we use delta. Okay, we use delta to measure our directional exposure. And the simple definition, we've done other Jedi option segments on it, but the simple definition is how much you make or lose if the underlying stock rises $1. Okay, so if you have a delta of 725, you lose $725 if the underlying stock falls $1. Okay, if you only have a delta of 72, you only lose $72 if the underlying stock falls $1. Okay, so your relationship to a $1 move in the underlying stock, big delta, more exposure. Low delta, right? Small delta, not a lot of exposure. Okay, so conceptually, I want the number to go up if the market's healthy and breaking resistance. I want the number to go down if the market's unhealthy. Okay. The challenge that you have with thinking about a whole portfolio is I don't just have one position. It would actually be very easy if I did. I'm just long Apple. Okay, well, whatever your delta is on Apple is your directional exposure, and you can push buttons and pull levers to manipulate that up and down. Okay. But it gets challenging when you own Apple and Microsoft and Chipotle and Humana and the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ and a basket of other things. And so the question is, well, how do I measure the aggregate exposure of a bunch of different positions? Okay, because they're not all the same. They're not all apples to apples. It's apples and oranges and bananas. And I'm trying to equalize though and equalize them and state them in like terms. This is where the idea of beta weighted delta comes into play. Really, in simplest terms, a $1 move in Apple is different than a $1 move in Chipotle or any other stock. Okay, AMD or whatever. Okay. And so I can't just be like, oh, well, I have 50 Apple deltas and I have 20 CMG deltas and 10 AMD deltas. How much exposure do I have? It's like in math, you learned you have to convert those numbers into you need a common denominator. Okay, you got to state them in like terms so then you can add them up. Why is a $1 move in Apple and CMG and AMD different? If it wasn't obvious, they're different prices. Right? CMG is like $2,000 right now. $1 is nothing on CMG. If it was a $20 stock, $1 represents a 5% move. And so it's relative to the stock price. They also have different volatilities. Even if Apple and CMG and AMD were all $50 stocks, maybe Apple moves a lot every day and AMD barely moves. So you have to adjust for volatility. That's where the beta term comes in, beta weighting. It's like you're adjusting for volatility. Beta is a synonym for volatility. So what beta weighted delta does is you can pick the common denominator, and the software will restate all the deltas of all those different trades you have in terms of a single underlier, the common denominator. And so you may have like, okay, I got Apple, and that's 50 deltas, and CMG, I've got 25 deltas, and AMD, I've got 100 deltas. Again, I can't add those together. Can't add those up. They're apples and oranges and bananas. I need apples and apples and apples. And so what you do is you could say choose SPY as the common denominator. And the software will say, okay, well, we kind of know historically if the S&P moves $1, we know how much AMD should move. We know how much CMG and Apple should move. So it knows the relationship between the stocks, and it can restate the deltas in terms of a $1 move in the S&P. So it might be, all right, well, 50 deltas on Apple is the equivalent of 40 S&P deltas. And 25 deltas on Chipotle is the equivalent of 10 spider deltas. I'm making these up, but 100 AMD deltas is 20 S&P deltas. Okay, now they're stated in like terms. Now you want to know the aggregate exposure? 40 plus 10 plus 20 is 70, right? Your portfolio is 70 S&P deltas. Okay, your portfolio is the equivalent of owning 70 shares of the S&P, right? Your portfolio will fluctuate $70 for every dollar move in the S&P. Now you know. Now you know what your aggregate exposure is. Okay. In Thinkorswim, you just go to the monitor tab. You just have a delta column, and by default, it will be stating these apples, bananas, oranges, grapes. They're all in different terms. This is BGS, how many deltas I have on that. This is Boston Scientific, DocuSign, et cetera, et cetera. Well, again, $1 in FCX is different than $1 in IWM. So adding up all these deltas and saying you have 455 deltas, it's nonsense. What does that even mean? Which one of these stocks are we talking about moving $1, resulting in a $455 move? I don't know. It's nonsense. What you have to do is click on the beta weighting tool and put in a common denominator, a single underlier. And then when you do that, it restates all the deltas. And now you're seeing the weighted total, which is 133. This portfolio is 133 spider deltas. Now you know. Now you know how much it is. And then you can start to create some rules around that in determining what's enough, what's not enough, what's too much, what's too little. All right. And then once you know how to do that, then you'll learn how to increase it and decrease it in response to the market breaking resistance or breaking support. And I'm running out of time, but the final thing I'll say on this is if I want to decrease my portfolio delta, you have two choices. Choice number one is exit bull trades. Choice number two is enter bear trades, or some combination of the two. If I felt like this 133 spider deltas was too much and the market's breaking support and I want to get smaller, I'm either coming in here and closing some of these bull trades, or I am adding some bear trades, or some combination of the two to knock this delta where I want to. And so when you hear Matt or Mark or any of the coaches talk about, well, got to sell some covered calls, got to cover the position, got to play defense, what they're talking about is reducing the portfolio delta, reducing your exposure while the market's misbehaving, just to minimize the damage, make it hurt less. Okay. And so as you begin to kind of coalesce around this idea and really understand what it means, it empowers you to control things and to not be caught off guard and to not lose more than you expected. Measure it, learn how to manipulate it, and you'll be a more successful trader.